Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Central Baptist Church. I guess everyone got that much needed rain last night. I know I needed it real bad. I was kind of sweating out that fertilizer I threw out there on the ground, making sure it got a rain on it. But anyway, I did, so I should have put it in the ground last night. All right, we're going to sing in that small red book. It'll be on the screen. This world's not my home. This world is not my home, I'm just a passing through. My treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. They're all expecting me, and that's one thing I know. My Savior pulled me, and now I'm onward go. I know He'll take me through, though I am weak and poor, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Just up in the glory land we'll live eternity. The saints on every hand are shouting victory. Their songs of sweetest praise drip back from heaven's shore, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. I don't know, these letters are getting smaller all the time. So guess I had to get them up here like this. All right, I'm gonna do one more, and then Billy Joe's gonna do a special music. You ladies got one for me yet? When y'all gonna have one? Next Wednesday night? One more week. It'll be 2 weeks. All right. Okay, I'm gonna do one sweet hour of prayer. Sweet hour of prayer, sweet hour of prayer that calls me from a world of care and bids me at my Father's throne make whole my wants and wishes known in seasons of distress and grief. My soul has often found relief and oft escaped the tempter's snare by thy return, sweet hour of prayer. Sweet hour of prayer, sweet hour of prayer, thy wings shall thy consolation share, till from our feeling home the heights I view my home and take my flight. This robe of flesh I drop and rise to seize the everlasting pride, and shout while passing through the air, farewell, farewell, sweet hour of prayer. Okay, Billy Joe.
Kathy, we made it. Well, at least it's a smiling bunch anyway. Y'all thought I wasn't praying that I'd get up them steps, but I hope y'all was help so you could help me. We're going to do this song. It's The Wings of a Dove. When trouble surrounds us, when evil comes, the body grows weak, the spirit grows numb. When these things beset us, He's gonna forget us. He down His love and the wings of a dove, on the wings of a snow white dove. He sends me His pure, sweet love, a sign from above, on the wings of the dove. When Noah had drifted on the flood many days, he searched for land in various ways. Trouble he had some, but forgotten, He sent him His love on the wings of a dove, on the wings of a snow white dove. He sent His pure, sweet love, a sign from above, on the wings of the dove. When just went down to the water that day, he was baptized in the usual way. When it was done, God blessed His Son. He sent him His love on the wings of a dove. Everybody. On the wings of a snow white dove, He sent down His pure, sweet love, a sign from above, on the wings of a dove. Thank y'all.
I was at least going to, I don't know, break your fall. I don't know. That's about all I could do. All right. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for today. Lord, I thank you for this opportunity this evening to be in your house. Lord, I thank you for your love and for your mercy and grace. Lord, I thank you for all the many blessings that you bestow on us. Lord, for your protection and for your guidance and your direction. Lord, I lift up all of those that are on our prayer list this evening, those that are in need of a physical touch, those that are in need of guidance and life and direction. Lord, I pray that you would touch them and that you would heal them. Lord, for the families in Uvalde that are suffering a great tragedy at the loss of their children and the loss of their loved ones. Lord, I pray for your hand upon them. I pray that they would lean on you and trust in you in this time of mourning, this time of loss. And Lord, I pray that you would remove such evil from this world, and that you would continue, that you would protect our children, Lord, as they sit in their schools and the churches and communities. Lord, that you would give us your protection. Lord, be with me as we study your word tonight, Lord, and give me the words to speak. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. When I got the news yesterday, I just got a notification on my phone. It popped up and it said, active shooter in Texas elementary school. And having been a teacher, we go through those drills and we do all the things that we're supposed to do, and we try to prepare ourselves for that time. It's a sad world that we have to do that in, but I didn't know anything, I didn't know any details or anything like that at the time, and I thought, my thought went to the teachers that were trying to protect the children who, and if you've seen today, one of the teachers, I hadn't heard about both of them, but one of them who it's basically sacrificed her life to try to save her students, and it's just tough. We sing the song tonight, I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Sometimes that evil just, we talked about it in our prayer on Tuesday, talked about the darkness and the evil and so much that was going on around our, even before that happened yesterday afternoon, yesterday morning. We had talked about that yesterday morning in prayer, and what we can do as the church, what we've been called to do is to be the light. We really can't do anything about the darkness. It exists. I had a guy who I've talked to. He wasn't a member of our church there in Naples, but I talked to him all the time and tried to counsel him and that sort of thing. And he was just really distraught about yesterday's shooting, and so he messaged me, and it just big why, I said evil. That's the only answer. And there's a lot of evil in this world, and we can't do anything about it. We can pray for it. We can pray for the protection. We can pray for God to change the hearts and the minds of those people. But what we have to do is be that light on a hill, and take the love that we have in Christ, and take that out into a world that by far needs it and needs a lot of it. And so, anyway, that's our response to the shooting and to any evil that we witness. Tonight we're going to be back in Philippians chapter 2. When I was coaching, and when I was defensive coordinator, my job as a defensive coordinator was to figure out what our opponent was going to do and then come up with a plan to stop them from doing what they were going to do. And I would spend hours and hours and hours, and coaches put in so many hours, it's unbelievable. I would spend hours looking at film and studying tendencies and looking at numbers, and numbers would start to dance on paper because I'd stare at them for so long, to figure out the what that our athletes needed to do in order to be successful. And so I could sit down, and I had guys that I worked with back then that will tell me now. They didn't tell me this back then. They'd say, you were just too smart. That was the problem, is you had all of these big plans, and your intelligence, your level of thought was here, and the kids are down here. And so, I mean, I would come up with all these plans and stuff. And so on Mondays, first day of practice, we would walk through every aspect of what we were going to do that week as part of our game plan. And I would explain, we'd get the entire team together, and I'd explain to the entire team the what, and we'd go over it rather quickly. But then we would break up into our individual groups, and we'd explain the how. So they needed to know what to do, and then the individual coaches would then show them and teach them how to do what it was they needed to do. And they couldn't be successful if they didn't figure out the how. Because I could tell them all day the what, this is what you need to do, but if I didn't tell them how to do it, they weren't going to be very successful. Just like I could tell you, hey, I need you to, I don't know, go write a computer program that's going to do such, 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 such. I just told you what to do. How many of y'all know the how to do that? It would take me time to study it. So the what's important, but the how is extremely important in order to accomplish the what. One year I was coaching in Wellston, Oklahoma. The 1 year we lived in Oklahoma, and I was the defense coordinator there. And to say that they took things a little less serious than we do in Texas is an understatement. Like when I was coaching in Texas for 12 years in Texas, 1 year in Oklahoma, I mean, practices 2.5, 3 hours long, that's pretty much an average practice. There we practiced for an hour. And so I was given 25 minutes to go over, like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 25 minutes, that's all you get. Well, it's hard in 25 minutes to go over the what and the how. And so what I would do is I would just kind of give them a quick crash course in the what, and then hope through some sort of experience, some sort of mistake, some sort of accident that they would figure out the how. It didn't work. We were not very good at figuring out the how, and it was probably because, well, it was because we didn't have enough time. The head coach asked me one time, he said, I was like, man, I got to have more time. I can't get it all done in 25 minutes. I just can't do it. He said, well, how much time do you want? I said, 45 minutes, an hour would be great. Like, that ain't going to happen. I thought, oh, all right, well, I guess I'll just do with what I can. And so the kids needed to know the what, but they also needed to know the how. And the what is the big picture, and the how is their small little part. How do they get from point A to point B? And so in our text tonight in Philippians, we've been talking about, Paul's been giving us a practical teaching on spiritual unity within the church. And he's been giving us a lot of what's. He's been giving us, you got to have the right motive, you've got to have the right marks, you got to have all of these things, the what behind it. But he hasn't really discussed the how. And so tonight we're going to look at the how, or the means, the right means, the right process. How do you accomplish spiritual unity within a church? Like, what is it that each and every one of us have to do in order to maintain that spiritual unity? So the how behind the what that he's been talking about spiritual unity. So we're in chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. And Paul says, do nothing out of rivalry or conceit, but in humility consider others as more important than yourselves. Everyone should look out not only for their own interest, but also for the interest of others. That's the how in order to accomplish the what. That is how we go about accomplishing unity within the church. And so he gives us, in these two short verses, he gives us 5 means or 5 methods that we need to do in order to maintain unity within the church body. And in these 5 means, in these 5 methods, Paul answers the question, how is genuine spiritual unity actually achieved? Like, what do we need to do in order to maintain that? And so how do we go about doing these things that we know we need to do in order to actually get to where we want to go? So we all know the church wants to be unified. We want to work together. We all want to be a part. We all want to have a body of believers that gets along and gets things done and accomplishes the task of preaching the gospel and growing the kingdom of Christ. But that's hard to do if we're not unified. And so now he gives us how do we go about doing that. And just like several of the other things we've talked about, these 5 means that he gives us they're interwound, they're interrelated, and they're also inseparable. You can't remove one and then keep other ones. You have to put them together. They all have to be in there together. 3 of them are negatives, or don't do this, and 2 of them are positives, do this. In the Holman Christian Standard, what we read and what's up there on the screen, it says, do nothing out of rivalry or conceit. And the word that is translated here as rivalry can also be read selfishness. If you've got, I think the American Standard says selfishness. I think the King James might even say selfishness. But it's a Greek word that was often used in the sense of running for it was a political term. It was like running for a political office, running for a political position, that selfishness or that rivalry. So if you think about a politician and the things that they do in order to win the race, they jockey for position. They're going to do whatever they can to sling mud at their opponent. They're going to do, which we get more and more of all the time. They're going to do whatever they can to sling mud at their opponent. They're going to put themselves above their opponent. They're going to say, my opponent says this, and my opponent says this, but I say that, or I believe this way. You know, they're going to do whatever they can to in your mind as the voter, where you think of them and you think of them up here. So that rivalry or that selfishness is talked about in trying to make yourself in a position where you're at the top. In those type of cases, in that case, you want to create division. If you're running for a political office or a position, you want to create, if you're doing it for the right reasons, you want to create division. You want to separate yourself from your opponent. You want to say, I'm the better candidate because of, and then whatever the reason is. And then you want to say, my opponent is not the better candidate because of, and then whatever the reason is. And you would want to do that. But in the church, in the body of believers within the church, we don't want to do that. That should never be the case. We're not jockeying for position of prevalence within the church body or authority or position within the church body. I don't know that I've actually experienced this, but I've heard stories of people that fight to be, and deacons. I'm not saying this in a bad way, but this is the way it gets. They want to be that top deacon, and they'll do whatever they can to be that top. And I've heard horror stories about deacons that just come in and jockey for position, and they're going to do whatever they can to knock everybody else down in order to build themselves up. And so we don't want to do that. And no surprise here, this first means that he talks about, this rivalry or this selfishness, mentions that Paul mentions here is rejecting that selfishness. To make sense, and this makes sense because if we look at selfishness Selfishness is the root of every sin. Why do we sin in the way that we sin? Well, we do that because of our selfishness, because I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to do what makes me feel good. Therefore, I'm going to, if that means I've got to, go against God's will, that's what I'm going to do, because it's about me and it's not about God. If you look at Satan, what was it that got him kicked out of heaven? It was his selfishness. He looked at God and he saw God was all powerful and God was in control. And Satan says, you know what? I think I'm better than God. And I'm going to take power away from God. And I'm going to do whatever I can in order to jockey for that position that sets me up above God. And how did he do that? Well, he even goes and gets a third of the angels that get behind him and support him. And they're coming right along and they're helping him jockey for position to defeat God. Like you and I would hope that sounds like ridiculousness to us, but Satan felt that he could, by his selfishness, that he could. Oh yeah, I can take down God. I can do it. If you've ever met somebody who was a fighter, like a boxer or a whatever, MMA, it doesn't matter who you put in the ring with. I can beat them. I can whoop them. I can take them, And that's just kind of their attitude. And that was Satan's attitude too. I can do it. I can take them down. And it's that pride that got him, or that selfishness that got him kicked out of heaven. Pride also. It was Adam and Eve's selfishness that placed their will and their desire above what God had told them to do. What God told them, he said, you can eat of every tree in this garden except that one. And what did they do? They went to that one. Now, I don't know what all the trees were. We don't know any of that. I can imagine the fruit of those trees were absolutely amazing, to be the best fruit that you've ever eaten in your life. And the one tree that they were told not to eat from, their selfishness said, nope, what I want is to eat from that tree. And so they went straight to that tree, and they ate from that tree. And then this selfishness is at the root of every sin that has taken place since that time. So selfishness or staying away from selfishness is the first thing Paul talks about. And again, he says, do nothing out of selfishness. Do nothing out of selfishness. Now, in the Greek text, we don't find that verb do. It's not there. But it's a grammatical form that basically, if you take it and you look at it, it means nothing by way of selfishness, is basically what it says. So, translated into English, nothing by way of selfishness, you could translate that best as do nothing out by selfishness. So, this is a negative command that doesn't simply prohibit doing selfishness. It also, it doesn't just prohibit it by its actions. It also goes as deep as the heart of the matter. It's not just, I'm not going to act on my selfishness. He's saying here, don't even have the selfishness. Like, it doesn't even need to be in your heart. It doesn't need to be in your mind. It doesn't need to exist in your spirit. Because you could have it there in your heart and never act on it. You could have it in your mind and not act on it. But at some point in life, somewhere along the line, that selfishness has to come out. It's going to rear its ugly little head, and by some action that we take, our selfishness is going to come out. It's going to exhibit itself. And this is a lot like what Jesus said. What was it Jesus said when he was talking about lust? And he says, even if you look at a woman with lust, you've already committed adultery with her. There was no. He's saying here, Jesus is saying, it's good. It's not good enough just not to act on it. You don't even need to have it in your heart. And what is he says the same thing about hate. He says, if you harbor hate in your heart and against your brother, then you might as well have already committed murder. So again, there's no action that's actually taken place. It's just in your heart. And Jesus says, even if you have that sin in your heart, it's still sin. And so Paul is going off of that same thing, and he's saying, don't even have it in your heart. Don't even have it in your life. It's not a fact of, well, I'm selfish and I want things to be done my way and I want things to be done exactly the way that I want them to do, and I'm gonna elbow everybody else in the nose on my way to get it done what I want done. I'm never going to act on that, but I have it in my mind. At some point, it's going to come out. At some point, it's going to have to rear its ugly little head. So Paul goes in this same direction, and he's adding that it's not enough. It's not enough to get rid or to have the selfishness in your heart and not act on it. The selfishness, you need to remove it completely. And if we allow that selfishness to hang around, it's eventually going to consume us and destroy us. Because where do we keep inching closer to that selfishness? It's just like putting anything we put into our minds. We may never, I'm not going to say never, we may not act on it today. We may not act on it tomorrow. We may not act on it for the next 10 years. But at some point, if we allow that sin to hang around in our mind and in our hearts, we're going to find ourselves acting upon it. I've spoken with several individuals who, see how to word this, are trying to make right their relationship with their spouses after infidelity. Every time, every individual, the men, every man that I've talked to, it all starts with, well, I didn't do it on purpose. I didn't go out and have the plan in my, we just started talking, and the next thing, one thing led to another thing, which led to another thing. What happened? They allowed that lust, they allowed that sin to stay in their hearts, to stay in their minds, and they didn't get rid of it, and eventually they acted upon it. And so Paul's saying the same thing here about that selfishness. If it's there, even if there's no outward manifestation of it right now, or even in the near future, if there's no outward manifestation of it, that selfishness is going to breed anger. It's going to breed resentment. It's going to breed jealousy, and eventually, we're going to end up acting on it. It's like someone suffering from an illness that there's no symptoms of, and I think of a lot of times like heart disease. They say sometimes the first sign of heart disease or the first symptom of heart disease is a heart attack. Like you've had it your entire life and you didn't even know about it until you had that heart attack. Like liver disease is the same way. A lot of times you don't even know it until the liver just decides to quit. When my dad had his stroke, and the cardiologist was talking to us, and he said, so what does he do for a living? I said, well, he's a coach. He said, well, I don't know how he could run up and down the football field and basketball court and all that the way that, the condition he was in. My mom said, he was a jogger. He jogged 4 miles a day, 6 days a week for like 20-something years. The cardiologist was like, no way. It's impossible. There's no way he could have done that. Yeah, he did. What was the symptom? I mean, the very first symptom he ever had was a massive stroke that ended up killing him. And so what Paul is saying here, if you've got it in there and there's never any symptom of it, eventually it's going to come up. And you're going to go too far, and you're going to get to the point where it's going to be devastating. You're going to have some sort of devastating event of selfishness that's going to end up ruining us. And so when we focus on our personal agendas, when we focus on our personal wants instead of the growth and the advancement of the kingdom of God and the growth and advancement of the church and the kingdom of Christ, we're going to find division and we're going to find discord. Even if those things grow out of a genuine, heartfelt, biblically based ministry. So what you could find is someone who, well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but we have to check our hearts and our selfishness at the door. All right, number 2, the second means that Paul mentions here of promoting unity with the church is staying away from, another negative, staying away from empty conceit. And this is the only place in the New Testament that we find this compound word that talks about empty conceit or conceit. And it's, again, they're interrelated. It's very, very similar to selfishness. and that it refers to this highly exaggerated opinion of oneself, where selfishness seeks for the good of like my personal goals, like I want my objectives, my plans, I want them to be up here. Empty conceit seeks personal glory. Instead of my plans and my ideas being on top, it's me and my glory being on top. So I want to receive all the glory, and I want to receive all the recognition, and I want to receive all the honor. It's about having this overinflated self-image of who we are. And this is the person that no matter what they're talking about is always right. Is always right and expects you to follow them no matter what. No matter how much you disagree, no matter how much you think you ought to do something else, no matter how much you think, or agree or disagree with their ideas, and this is the person that's always right. And Paul references this in Romans, and he says this is someone that is wise in their own estimation. This is someone who has this overinflated opinion of themselves. In the ancient Greek culture, if you study Greek culture, you find out that humility was something they stayed away from. Humility was a sign of weakness. If you showed any humility in your life, you were considered a weak person. But even the ancient Greeks, even the Greeks that had that in that culture, even they understood and recognized when a person's view of themselves was overinflated. Like and that's pretty bad if you think about it. When everybody has an inflated view of themselves, but yet they can still pick out one person that has an overinflated view of themselves, that's pretty bad. You know that person is pretty overinflated if everybody's overinflated. And the word that they would use for this, that's translated into English, is hubris. It's this exaggerated pride. It's this excessive pride in thinking of who we are. And so when Paul is writing to the church in Galatia, he says, if anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. When we try to put ourselves up here, when in all reality we need to be down here, we're deceiving ourselves. We end up creating division. And we have to be on constant guard of this, because even within ourselves, when it comes to that empty conceit, when it comes to putting ourselves, on a higher pedestal, there's self-deception in there. So the person who has this empty conceit doesn't even notice it, doesn't see it, because they've deceived themselves. They don't see how much they're overinflated. All they see is that everybody else around them is not doing what they want them to do. All they see is, I'm right, I know I'm right, I've got it all figured out, and all you other dummies around here won't follow me, and they honestly believe that they're right, and they have this deception that's going on. So it's very easy for us to deceive ourselves whenever that conceit gets involved, and that's why it's important for us to be on guard and to stop and to step back from every situation and go, okay, let me consider everybody else in the process. Let me consider everybody else's ideas. Let me consider everybody else's thoughts, and actually think about those things instead of just ignoring them. The third one, and this is a positive one, third means of promoting spiritual unity is having humility of mind. And again, humility in the ancient Greek culture was a sign of weakness. So when Paul writes and he says, have humility of mind, this would have been a foreign concept to them, to make themselves humble, or to humble themselves. This would, again, it's very similar to the other ones, but humility is we talked Sunday night about faith, but humility is a bedrock characteristic of Christianity, because we have to humble ourselves and put Christ as the Lord of our lives. We have to intentionally say, I am not worthy of the love that Christ gives me, and I am not worthy of of the death and the blood and the crucifixion of Christ. I'm not worthy of those things. We have to humble ourselves as Christians. Humility of mind, again, in the Greek culture was foreign, but it comes from the word that literally is translated as lowliness of mind, or lowliness of somebody. And it was used to refer to oftentimes a slave. So you would look at a slave and you would think that they're low of mind. And it would be to say that they are not important, that they don't mean anything. Their opinions don't matter. They're just a slave. And then here Paul is saying, make yourself like that slave. If that's the opinion you have of that slave, then that's who you need to become. You need to have that lowliness of mind, that humility of mind. And so humility is to intentionally place ourselves lower than others around us. And it's to regard others as more important than myself, to regard others' opinions, to regard others' thoughts as more important than my own. That doesn't mean we just completely disregard our own thoughts, but going back to what we just talked about with the conceit, we have to consider the thoughts of other people. And humility says you have to stop and consider those thoughts. Someone who is not humble won't even think about it. Like they just completely shut you off and ignore them. So, humility considers those thoughts. The verb there that's translated as consider is much like that we talked about already, and it's more than just an internal opinion. It's a thought-out conclusion. It's something that you can't say, well, I'm going to think about it. It's something that you actually have to force yourself to do. It's not pretending that others are important. It's not pretending that other people's opinion is important, because I know people who will stop and listen and, okay, yeah, that sounds great, but no, I'm not going to do that. And that's to everything that you even talk about. And they act like, oh yeah, tell me what your opinion is. No, I'm not going to listen to it. They act like they want to hear your opinion. They act like they want your thoughts. But in reality, they're just doing that because they're trying to be nice. And so Paul here is saying, no, it's actually believing that someone's opinion matters. It's actually believing that someone is more important than we are. It's putting ourselves down. And so, again, this is not natural for us. This is not in our natural human state, fallen state. This is not who we are, and it's easy for us to say, yes, we have to humble ourselves. There's a song, and some of y'all probably know it, an old country and western song. I guess it was country and western. It's hard to be humble when you're perfect. I didn't even finish the song, and every one of y'all are laughing. It's hard to be humble when you're perfect in every way. It's when we look in the mirror, and as he says, you get better looking every day. I get better looking every day. It's hard to be humble when I'm just perfect. There obviously is no humility there, and so it's easy for us to say, I'm a humble person. You know who the least humble people are the ones that will tell you they're humble. I'm just a humble old preacher. If somebody has to tell you that they're humble, in order for you to know that they're humble, there may not be any humility there at all. So it's easy for us to say that, but it's hard for us to actually achieve it. It's difficult for us to put ourselves in that position. And maybe the easiest way to go about doing this is to look at things through the lens of our own sin. Because when we look at things through the lens of our own sin, that kind of changes the way we look at other people. When we have a tendency to judge people on their sin and say, well, how dare they? I can't believe they would ever do. And then our humility says, yeah, but what about you? We're not talking about me. We're talking about that person over there. I'm not pointing at you, Kathy. That person over there. It's if we look at ourselves through our sin and what Christ has done for us and what we should have been punished to hell for, then humility becomes a little bit easier when we start to look at it through that lens. If you look at Paul. Paul refers to himself in Scripture. He says, I am the least of the apostles not fit to even be called an apostle. Paul said, I'm not even worthy of being called an apostle. He said, I am the least of all the saints. But not only did he say he was the least of all the saints, he says he was the premier or the foremost of all sinners. He was the chief of all sinners. Now, I don't know that any of us would put ourselves on that level and say, oh, I am the foremost or the chief of all, like I am the worst of all sinners. And Paul says, that's who I am. I am the chief of all sinners. So his humility there, he doesn't just say, hey, you have to humble yourself. He exhibits it as well. It becomes an action for him. The fourth means that Paul mentions for promoting unity within the church is a negative admonition to this, and look out not only for your interest. Now, many divisions within churches oftentimes come from programs and from policies that are equally biblically important. The problem comes when we choose to promote our program, our ministry, at the expense of other ministries. And I have been a part of this, and it's not pretty. When someone looks and says, well, youth ministry is the most important ministry within the church, we have to do everything that we can to promote youth ministry. Yeah, the adult ministry over here is fine. Yeah, we have to do everything we can to promote this ministry, this youth ministry, and this is the most important. If we don't get it built right, and we're going to kick the adult ministry all on, both of these ministries are important. Both of them are biblically, have biblical value and are set up on biblical lines. But if we look at one and say, well, this one is the most important, and we're going to do whatever we can at the expense of that one in order to accomplish this one, then we have problems. And it could go the other way around too. The adult ministries is the most important. If we ever take care of them, that's fine. If we ever do anything for the kids, we'll see. So you could get in that one, or you could say, well, personal evangelism is most important. It's so much more important than small group Bible study. And so we're gonna rise up, and those of us that are into personal evangelism, we're going to cause all of this stink within the church, because on Wednesday night and Sunday night, we shouldn't be sitting in here in small group Bible study like this. We should be out knocking on doors and blah, 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 blah. And so both ministries are important. Both ministries have value. Both ministries are biblical. But if you have a group or a person or an individual or a group of individuals that are trying to promote this ministry over this ministry, and they're going to step on this ministry in order to do so, then you have issues. And you could continue going on. You could put all kinds of different ministries against each other, stack them against each other, and say this is most important. This, whatever. So if we all work together, and we say, okay, youth ministry is important, adult ministry is important, personal evangelism is important, small group Bible study is important. All of these seek to glorify God. All of these seek to glorify Christ. All of these seek to build the kingdom of Christ. We're going to do whatever we can to build this one. We're going to do whatever we can to build this one. We're not going to knock that one down in order to build that one. We're going to do everything we can in order to promote the growth of the kingdom. Well, if that's the case, then all programs rise. All groups rise. Everybody, what's the old saying? A rising seas lift all boats. Or lift all ships. If the seas rise and the church is prospering because people are getting along, guess what? Youth ministry is going to grow, adult ministry is going to grow. This is going to grow, that's going to grow. So we have to respect those and seek to put the glory of God ahead of what our own personal opinions are. And the last main, or the last how that Paul mentions is to do this. He says at the very end of verse 4, but also for the interest of others. So he says, don't look out only for your own interest, but also for the interest of others. So instead of just saying, well, I'm going to not just put my interest forward, I'm going to put somebody else's interest forward as well. instead of simply promoting our own self, our own ambitions, our own interests, we have to push the interest of others as well. Like, we have to say, if I'm not actively involved or working, and I'm just using this as in youth ministry, then part of my job within the church would be to promote that youth ministry. Or if I'm not actively involved in adult ministry because I'm doing youth ministry, then I need to work to promote the adult ministry. Meaning I have to do it for their good. I have to lift them up. I have to promote them. And again, this may be easy to understand because we get this point, but it's difficult to put into practice. Just like all the other ones. It's difficult to understand. I mean, it's easy to understand. It's difficult to put into practice. Again, because this is not part of our human nature. To look out for the interest of others. What our human nature says, I'm looking out for number one. I'm putting me first. I'm going to do what's best for me. I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to do my ministry. I'm going to do what I want in the church and so on and so forth. And I don't care what anybody else thinks or does or says. It's all about me. And that's so our human nature goes against what Paul says here. And so we have to make that conscious effort. We have to be intentional, which, if I haven't said that word before, is a word that I use all the time. We have to be intentional on every one of these things because you have to make yourself do them. And among all the other things, looking out for the interest of others requires us to do things that sometimes are difficult. Scripture tells us to rejoice with those who rejoice, to weep with those who weep. Well, that means I have to put somebody else's interest above my own. If I look at, and I'm bad about this, looking at my children, well, if you hadn't been doing what you were told not to do, you wouldn't be sitting there crying with a stubbed toe, you know? I don't weep with them when they weep. He's asleep. Okay. But he's moving. That's not part of our human nature to invest ourselves in somebody else when what they're doing, what they think, what they're involved in is not what we're involved in. That was in Romans 12:15. And it means to continually pursue things which make for peace and the building up of one another. To not eat meat or drink wine or do anything by which your brother stumbles. And that's another one. And I'm not going to get too deep into that. But there's certain things that if you know is a stumbling block to somebody, if you know that it's going to trip them up in their faith and in their walk and their spiritual growth, but yet you don't put their interest above your own and you go, well, I have spiritual freedom, I have Christian freedom, and I can do whatever I want. Okay, you're right. But if that's a stumbling block to that brother beside you and you trip them up, that's a sin because you were selfish and you didn't consider them above yourself. All right. Questions, comments, concerns? Yes, ma'am.